She thought she was done with love, done with family, done with being needed. After burying a husband she never truly knew, and carrying years of quiet hurt that no one asked about, Delora just wanted to live her days out in the cabin by the river unseen. But then came the knock. It wasn't a man. It wasn't even a word. Just three barefoot Comanche children, skin like stone, and eyes too hollow for their age. They didn't cry. They just looked at her as if asking a question no one had ever answered. And somehow, she said yes. She let them in. But what she didn't know was that their father Chaska, a hardened warrior with grief in his blood and suspicion in his bones, was already watching from the trees. What would make a man like that trust a woman like her? What would make him leave his children, then come back only to find they'd begun calling someone else mama? And when he did return, the town stared. A Comanche man, a white widow, three children with no place. The world had only ever told her, "You're not enough." But what if this time she was? What if three children, a fierce father and a woman with nothing left to give, had just enough to build a family? Sometimes the most healing stories don't begin with love. They begin with an open door. What would you have done? Would you have taken the children and follow for more? Tender Wild West stories like this, and let us know in the comments if you'd stay to see how this one ends. In the quiet crook of Cottonwood Hollow, where the trees whispered to each other like widows mourning the same lost soldier, lived a woman known only as Miss Delora Gray. She wore black not for fashion, but for grief. Her husband, a railroad foreman, had perished in a fire so sudden that even the town bell didn't finish ringing before he was gone. Since then, Delora spoke little and asked for less. She lived alone in a cabin that had once been built with joy, but now stood in silence. The windows were clean, the bread always warm, and the rocker on the porch swayed only when the wind passed through. The town thought her kind but strange. That one, they'd say, nodding toward the edge of the woods, "She ain't all there, or maybe she's too much there." But no one bothered her, and that suited her fine. Then one brittle morning in early November, just as frost kissed the prairie grasses, she found footprints outside her door. Not one set, but three. Barefoot, small. She followed them down the slope toward the creek and found what no one would believe: three Comanche children, thin as fence wire, cheeks hollow bellies, empty eyes dark with something deeper than hunger. They didn't speak. They only looked at her. One of the boys clutched the youngest girl to his side like a shield. The other boy stared at her breadbasket. Silent as rabbits, they waited. Delora dropped to one knee and opened the blanket in her arms. "Come inside," she whispered, as if not to scare them off. "You're safe now." And without a word, the oldest boy took her hand. That was how the quiet widow who lived by sorrow became a mother again without anyone asking. The world outside her door had been silent for years, but something was knocking again. Snow came early that year. By mid-November, the wind had teeth and the trees had long since lost their coats. Inside Delora's cabin, however, it was warm. The children, whom she learned to call Kaya, Tomas, and Rico, barely spoke for the first days, but they ate. Lord, how they ate. Quietly, desperately, gratefully. Delora did not ask questions. Not yet. She sewed patches onto their tattered clothes, soaked their blistered feet in warm lye water, and made beds out of flour sacks and quilts. She taught them to whisper thank you, and when Rico finally giggled at her burnt corn cakes, her hands trembled over the skillet. But across the snow-covered valley, someone was watching. Chaska, a Comanche scout hardened by grief, and war had been tracking the children for 6 days. When he'd returned from a hunt to find their camp raided his sister's blood on the rocks, the children gone, he had let out a sound no man should hear himself make. Then he rode. His trail led to the white woman's land, to smoke curling from a chimney, to the scent of bread that didn't belong on Comanche wind. He hid behind the sycamores and watched. She was humming while brushing Kaya's hair as the little girl nestled into her side. Chaska's jaw locked. He should hate her. A white woman had taken his children. He should demand their return. But she was treating them as if they were hers, and they looked at her as if she was theirs. He didn't approach. Not yet. Just clenched the locket in his palm, the one that still held his wife's braid, and whispered something into the snow. For now he would wait. Watch. Decide. He came to take them back, but something about her made him pause. Delora had always believed grief walked in circles. It never truly left, only found quieter corners to sit in until something stirred it. And Chaska, though he stayed hidden, was stirring something in her. For days she felt his presence before she saw him, a tension in the woods, a silence that wasn't quite empty. Kaya would glance at the trees and whisper in Comanche. Thomas had begun sleeping with a wooden spoon under his pillow, guarding his brother and sister with a fierceness beyond his years. She didn't press them. Instead, she left food out near the edge of the tree line. Once a hunk of venison disappeared. Another time, her oldest cast iron pan was moved half an inch, still warm, with cooked rabbit. No tracks, just traces, like wind in a room. One evening, as she swept the porch, she found a feather tucked beneath the door frame, long, black, and glossy. Not dropped, placed. Delora held it to her chest. Then the knock came. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't uncertain either. When she opened the door, the fire crackling behind her, she saw him, the tall man with soot-dark hair and war in his eyes. "Where are they?" he asked, voice like gravel, softened by rain. She didn't answer with fear. She didn't move. She simply stepped aside and said, "They're warm and fed and loved." Chaska crossed the threshold. Inside, the children froze halfway between bread and laughter. Kaya's lip trembled. Tomas reached for the spoon in his waistband. Rico shrank behind the table, but Delora only whispered, "It's all right. He's their father." Chaska didn't speak. He just dropped to one knee and opened his arms. It took only seconds. All three ran to him. But Delora took a step back. For the first time in weeks, she was alone again. He got his children back, but something in him refused to leave her behind. The days that followed were quieter, but not empty. Delora still cooked, though now she made double. She still mended clothes by the fire, only now 4 pairs of moccasins sat beside her boots. The house had shifted, not just with more feet on the floor, but with something deeper, like the walls had taken a breath and were waiting to see what would come next. Chaska slept outside, not far, not hidden, just beyond the edge of the cabin beneath the sheltering pines. He didn't say much, but each morning he left a gesture behind stacked wood-sharpened tools. Herbs hung above the door. One morning he fixed the fence she'd stopped hoping someone would fix. The children, for their part, ran like breath through her home, sometimes wild, sometimes quiet, but always tethered to the space she had made for them. Delora watched, felt, waited. And then one night she brought out bread still warm, still sweet with molasses, and sat beside Chaska by the fire. "I thought you'd take them and go," she said softly. "I did too," he replied. Silence, then crackling fire. Then Chaska added, "But they speak your name in their sleep, not mine. Yours." Delora turned her face, but he reached for her hand. "Where they belong," he said, "I want to be too." She didn't pull away. They sat beneath a sky full of stars that had watched them long before they'd watched each other. And the silence between them no longer felt like absence, but choice. He gave her nothing at first, then gave her what no man ever had, a place she could stay and be chosen. For a while it seemed peace might settle like soft dust over the land, unnoticed, but always present. But peace, Delora knew, was never guaranteed, not in the West, and not when two worlds tried to share the same ground. It started with whispers, then with stares, then with men. Ranchers from town began stopping by, not for trade, not for neighborly concern, but for information. Some sat stiff on their saddles, eyes flicking from the Comanche children to the black-skinned widow standing between them. Others rode in circles, just close enough to unsettle, just far enough to not be called out for it. And then one afternoon, Sheriff Dobbs came. He wasn't cruel, but he was nervous, which Delora had learned could be worse. "Folks are saying the father's a Comanche scout, that he's living with you now, that you're keeping his young'uns like they're yours." "I am keeping them," she said calmly, "because they are mine now." Dobbs scratched his neck. "People are uneasy. There's rules, Delora, even unspoken ones." "I've lived by their unspoken rules," she said, voice steady, "for 50 years, and they gave me nothing." She turned toward the door. Behind her, she felt Chaska's presence, silent but unshaken, and the weight of his hand resting lightly at her back. Dobbs tipped his hat, muttered something about just doing his job, and left. That night, Delora didn't sleep, not out of fear, but out of something else. A question rising like mist from the soil. Can love survive where hatred still breathes? She looked to Chaska and the children now nestled close in sleep. I've lived through men taking what wasn't theirs, she whispered, but I won't live through anyone taking them. And so the woman once sold as a wife now stood as a mother and dared anyone to question it. The winds changed late in September. It wasn't just the air turning crisp or the golden flicker of cottonwoods surrendering their leaves. It was something sharper, quieter, like the feel of flint striking behind your back. Delora first noticed it when she returned from tending the chickens to find a crude symbol scratched on her barn door, a jagged X hastily drawn. That night the stew pot was tipped over the well bucket missing, but it was the dog that broke her. She found him whimpering near the woodpile, a broken arrow lodged in his leg. Not a Comanche arrow, something made to look like one. Chaska said nothing when he saw it. He simply picked the animal up, cradled it like a child, and carried it to the house. They want to start a fire, he said softly that night sitting near the hearth, because they don't understand what's growing here. Delora looked around at the braided rugs, the children's sketchings on the wall, the smell of cornbread cooling on the window ledge. I didn't build this home to run from it, she said. Not again. The next morning she rode to town, hair wrapped in a white scarf, eyes forward. She stepped into the town hall during the monthly meeting. Murmurs rose like bees in a shaken hive. She didn't wait to be spoken to. You all called me a widow when it suited your prayers. You pitied me in church, left pies at my door, and whispered that I was alone. Well, I'm not alone now, and that scares you. She paused, heart pounding. If you burn my barn, you'll burn my children's clothes. If you drive Chaska out, you'll drive me out too. I won't hide it, I love him, and I'll stand beside him until this land swallows me whole. Silence. Then one voice, an old woman rising with creaking knees. About time someone around here remembered what it means to love with both hands open. Her name was Mrs. Callahan. She clapped once, then twice. Then others joined. Not all, but enough. Outside, fall light dappled through leaves, and for the first time in weeks, the wind felt like breath and not warning. And so the widow stood not just for herself, but for a family no one had expected her to claim. Snow came early that year, thin flakes at first falling like shy thoughts, then heavier like blankets being laid over a weary land. The roof crackled in the cold. Smoke curled from the chimney. And inside the house that once held only silence, now lived 7 feet pattering in the kitchen, one kettle always singing, and the low, steady voice of a man reading aloud in Comanche to 3 wide-eyed children. Delora watched from the doorway, arms wrapped in a shawl Chaska had stitched with deer hide and cotton scraps. He was teaching them stories from his people, and somehow they remembered. They always did. Even in the dark, memory finds a way. The town, once cold, had thawed in small, quiet ways. Mrs. Callahan dropped off quilts. The blacksmith offered to sharpen blades. Even the sheriff tipped his hat now, though still with lowered eyes. Acceptance hadn't come with trumpets. It came in nods, in shared fence posts, in one neighbor showing another where the berries grew. One morning, Chaska stood on the porch holding something small, a ring hand-forged, simple, warm from his palm. I don't have words like you do, he told her, but I know the feeling. I want you to walk beside me, no hiding, no silence, just breath and bread and whatever the world gives us. Delora wept, not from sorrow, from arriving, because she had made a home where none had been offered, because she had raised children that weren't hers by blood, but were hers in every way that mattered, because she had been loved quietly, completely by a man who saw not her age, not her past, but her presence. In the quiet of that first snow, they married beneath the cottonwoods. The triplets ran wild through the frost, laughter ringing like wind chimes, and the river nearby, the one Delora once thought she'd drown beside, now shimmered with silver promise. Not every story is about triumph, but some are about healing, and some are about choosing love after you've been told you don't deserve it. Would you have stayed like Delora, or run like others before her, in a land as harsh as the wind and as lonely as a widow's silence? Love still found its way home. Delora didn't set out to be a mother again. Chaska didn't mean to trust a stranger with his blood. And those 3 children, bruised by hunger, shaped by fear, never dreamed they'd be cradled in something so ordinary, so life-saving as bread baked in a quiet cabin. But healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in small hands reaching for yours, in a bowl passed across a table, in someone calling you mama when you'd stop believing you could be called anything gentle again. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories start when someone opens a door not knowing who they're letting in, or what part of themselves they're about to reclaim. Maybe in your own life there's someone quietly watching, waiting, a neighbor, a friend, a child, hoping you'll see them. Maybe like Delora, you're more ready than you know. If this story stirred something in you, we invite you to subscribe to None, Wild West Saga, for more tales of quiet redemption and late-in-life love. Would you like to see what happened next in Delora and Chaska's journey, or hear more stories like this one? Drop a comment below, share with someone who needs a little hope today, and remember, healing is still possible even in the dust.